the first time Elara Vale realized her life had been quietly rewritten without her consent. It wasn't during the divorce hearing, or the cold way her husband's lawyer slid papers across the table like she was a problem being returned to a store. It was later, at midnight, in an apartment that still smelled faintly like someone else's cologne, even though she'd scrubbed the walls until her hands cracked. She stood barefoot on the kitchen tile with a glass of water she couldn't swallow, listening to the building settle and creak like it was whispering secrets through the pipes. Her phone lay face down on the counter because the last message she'd seen had been from her mother, a soft plea wrapped in disappointment. "You have to understand him, Elara. He wanted a family." Wanted, as if a child was a piece of furniture, as if her body had betrayed a promise she'd never made. She hadn't told anyone the part that haunted her most, the part she kept locked behind her teeth like a splintered prayer. The doctor had used gentle words, careful pauses, the kind of compassion that made the truth feel sharper. Unexplained infertility, likely permanent. She nodded, smiled too politely, gone home, and spent 3 hours on the bathroom floor staring at the grout lines like they were a map out of hell. She never told her husband the exact sentence the doctor said, not because she didn't trust him, but because she knew him, because she'd seen the way his love worked when it was tested. It didn't bend, it broke, and it broke her with it. Outside her window, the city glowed with indifferent light. Cars hissed over wet pavement. Somewhere, laughter burst from a bar across the street, a reminder that other people's nights were still full. Elara pressed her palm to the cold glass and wondered how loneliness could feel so physical, like a hand around her throat. She had a job that paid the bills and friends who checked in and a family who meant well. None of it filled the hollow because what she'd lost wasn't just a marriage. It was the future she'd pictured in quiet moments, the one where she wasn't always bracing for abandonment. She turned away from the window and stared at the envelope on the counter. It had arrived that evening, slipped under her door with no stamp and no return address. Thick paper, creamy and expensive, the kind that made you sit up straighter before you even opened it. Her name was written in ink so dark it looked almost like dried wine. Elara, she didn't remember picking it up. She only remembered the way her heart had started beating too fast, like her body recognized the handwriting, even though her mind didn't. She told herself it was probably a mistake, maybe a neighbor's prank, maybe some marketing thing. But when she'd held it, the paper had felt faintly warm, like it had been against someone's skin. She slid a finger under the seal and tore it open. Inside was a single card and a key, heavy and old-fashioned, the kind that belonged in a mansion or a myth. The card held only one line. "Come to Blackthorn Estate at midnight. Come alone, ask for the king." Elara let out a shaky laugh that sounded nothing like humor. The king, it was ridiculous, it was insane. She checked the card for a logo, a name, anything that made it make sense. There was nothing. Just the words and the scent that clung to the paper, faint but unmistakable, like cedar and smoke and something metallic beneath it. Something that made her skin prickle. She should have thrown it away. She should have called someone. She should have locked her door and pretended she'd never seen it. Instead, she found herself changing into her warmest coat, pulling her hair into a low knot with hands that trembled, and staring at her reflection in the hallway mirror like she was watching a stranger make a decision she couldn't stop. Her eyes were ringed with exhaustion. Her lips were pale. She looked like someone who'd been surviving for too long. Maybe that was why she went. Because when your life has already been burned down, the idea of walking into a fire doesn't feel as terrifying. The ride to Blackthorn Estate took her out of the bright, busy streets and into a part of the city that felt older, quieter, as if the modern world had politely avoided it. The cab driver barely spoke, only glanced at her once in the rearview mirror, and then kept his eyes fixed on the road like he didn't want to see where he was taking her. The rain had started again, fine and icy, turning the streetlights into blurred halos. Elara watched the buildings thin out, replaced by tall iron fences and shadowed trees that leaned over the road like they were listening. When the cab finally slowed, her breath caught. Blackthorn Estate rose behind a wrought iron gate, its stone walls slick with rain, its windows dark except for a few amber lights that glowed like watchful eyes. The place looked like it had been carved out of night itself, all sharp angles and heavy shadows, beautiful in a way that made her stomach twist. The gate was already open, as if it had been expecting her, as if it had known she would come. The driver stopped at the edge of the long driveway and cleared his throat without looking at her. "I don't go up there," he said quietly. His voice held something like fear or respect or both. Elara's fingers tightened around her purse strap. "It's fine," she whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was trying to convince. She stepped out into the rain. The cold hit her immediately, seeping into her coat, dampening the ends of her hair. The cab drove away faster than it should have, its taillights disappearing into the mist like a warning. For a moment, Elara stood there alone, the open gate yawning behind her like a mouth. The driveway stretched ahead, lined with black trees that rustled softly, their leaves wet and heavy. Somewhere in the distance, water trickled. Somewhere closer, an owl called once and fell silent. She began to walk. With each step, the estate seemed to grow larger, the air thicker. Her senses sharpened in a way she couldn't explain. She could smell the wet earth, the iron tang of rain, the faint perfume of flowers she couldn't see. She could hear her own heartbeat, loud and insistent, like it was trying to warn her. The key in her pocket felt heavier with every footfall, like it was anchoring her to a fate she didn't understand. Halfway up the drive, the lights in one of the upper windows shifted, as if someone had moved behind the curtain. Elara's pace faltered, the hair on the back of her neck rose. She wasn't alone. By the time she reached the front steps, her breath was coming in short, visible puffs. The front doors were enormous, carved with patterns that looked like twisting vines and strange symbols she couldn't recognize. 2 lanterns burned on either side, their flame steady despite the wind. Elara climbed the stone steps and reached for the handle. The door opened before she touched it. Warmth spilled out, rich and sudden, carrying the scent of old wood and something darker beneath it. A man stood in the doorway, tall and perfectly still, dressed in black like he'd stepped out of a dream that didn't believe in daylight. His face was partly shadowed, but his eyes caught the lantern light, a pale, unsettling color that made Elara's pulse skip. "Ms. Vale," he said softly, and the fact that he knew her name felt like a hand closing around her wrist. Elara swallowed. "Who are you?" The man's gaze lingered on her with unnerving calm, as if he'd been waiting a long time to see her in person. "A servant," he replied. "You were expected." "I didn't," Elara started, then stopped, because what was she even trying to say? That she shouldn't be here, that she didn't belong in a place like this, that she'd come anyway. The servant stepped aside. "Please, you'll freeze out there." Elara hesitated at the threshold, the warmth calling to her skin, the darkness behind her pressing in. And then she crossed into the estate, and the door closed with a quiet finality that sounded too much like a lock turning. Inside, the foyer was vast, lit by chandeliers that cast a golden glow over polished stone floors. A grand staircase curled upward, disappearing into shadow. The air was warm and heavy, filled with the low crackle of a fire somewhere deeper in the house. Everything felt too pristine, too controlled, like the estate was holding its breath. The servant took her coat with gentle hands. "This way." Elara followed him through hallways lined with portraits whose eyes seemed to follow her. The faces were elegant, pale, timeless, dressed in clothing from another era. She tried not to look too long, but something about them made her uneasy. They didn't look like ordinary family portraits. They looked like royalty, like predators disguised as aristocrats. They passed a set of tall doors, slightly ajar, and Elara caught a glimpse of a room filled with mirrors. For a second she thought she saw movement in one of them, a shadow that wasn't hers. She stopped. "Where are we going?" The servant paused, turning his head slowly. "To him." Her throat tightened. "To the king." The servant's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened with a flicker of something like warning. "Yes." Elara forced herself to keep walking, though her legs felt strangely unsteady. She told herself it was adrenaline, fear, the absurdity of this situation. But deep inside, another feeling stirred, something older than logic. Curiosity. A pull. as if some part of her had been waiting for this moment without knowing it. They reached a set of double doors, carved with the same twisting symbols as the front entrance. The servant stopped and placed his palm against the wood. The doors opened silently, revealing a vast library lit by firelight. The room was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with books, ladders resting against them like frozen motion. A fireplace roared at the far end, its flames painting the room in shifting gold and shadow. A long table held scattered papers and an open bottle of something dark. The air smelled like leather and smoke, and that same faint metallic edge that had been on the card. And then Elara saw him. He stood near the fireplace, one hand resting on the mantel, his posture loose but powerful, like an animal pretending to be relaxed. He was tall, taller than she expected, broad-shouldered, dressed in an immaculate black shirt with the top buttons undone, as if he'd forgotten to care about the world's rules. His hair was dark and slightly tousled, the kind that made you think of fingers running through it. His face was striking in a way that didn't feel entirely human, too sharp, too perfect, with cheekbones that caught the firelight and eyes that seemed to hold it. When he turned to face her, Elara's breath left her lungs. His gaze landed on her like a touch. Slow, possessive, hungry in a way that made her skin heat under her clothes. He didn't smile, but something in his expression shifted, as if seeing her confirmed something he'd already known. The servant quietly stepped back and disappeared, leaving Elara alone with him. The silence stretched, thick as velvet. Elara lifted her chin, forcing herself not to shrink. "You sent for me." The man's eyes darkened, as if he liked the sound of her voice. "I did. Why?" He took a step toward her, and the room seemed to tighten around them. The fire crackled louder. Shadows moved across the shelves as if the books themselves were leaning in to listen. "You're lonely," he said, and it wasn't a question. It was a statement so intimate it made her stomach drop. Elara's fingers curled into fists at her sides. "You don't know me." His mouth tilted slightly, not quite a smile, more like a private amusement. "I know more than you think." Elara's heart pounded. "Who are you?" He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could smell him, that same scent of cedar and smoke, and beneath it, something that made her mouth go dry. His gaze drifted over her face, as if memorizing every detail. "My name is Lucien Blackthorn," he said. The name landed with weight, like it belonged to a story people whispered about. "And in this city, people call me the king." Elara let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "That's a nickname." "It's a warning," Lucien corrected softly. Something in his voice made her skin prickle. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was controlled in a way that felt far more dangerous. Elara swallowed. "If this is some kind of joke." "It is." Lucien's eyes flicked to her throat, to the pulse beating there, and Elara had the sudden, terrifying sensation that he could hear it. "You shouldn't have come, not if you wanted to stay untouched." The words sent a shiver down her spine. Heat flared low in her belly, unwanted and undeniable. She hated that her body responded to him when her mind was screaming caution. Elara took a step back, her heel catching slightly on the rug. "I can leave." Lucien's gaze sharpened. The air changed, subtle but immediate, like a storm shifting direction. "You could," he said, "but you won't." Elara's breath hitched. "Don't tell me what I will or won't do." Lucien closed the distance in 2 slow steps, not rushing, giving her time to move, time to run. But her feet didn't obey her fear. They stayed rooted, as if the floor itself had claimed her. He stopped so close that the heat of him brushed her skin. Elara could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, like he'd smiled rarely but deeply. She could see a thin scar near his collarbone, barely visible above his shirt, and the sight of it sparked an ache in her chest she didn't understand. "You're hurt," Lucien murmured, and the way he said it made it sound like he recognized the feeling personally. "Someone took something from you." Elara's throat tightened. "My husband left me," she said before she could stop herself, the confession slipping out like blood from a wound she'd kept bandaged too long. "Because I couldn't give him what he wanted." Lucien's jaw flexed. For the first time, something raw flashed across his face, anger or pain or both. "He left you because he didn't deserve you." Elara's eyes burned, and she hated it. hated that a stranger could say one sentence and make her feel seen. You don't get to, Lucien lifted his hands slowly, not touching her, just hovering near her cheek, close enough that she felt the heat of his skin. I get to do whatever I want, he whispered. That's what makes me dangerous. Elara's breath came faster. Then why am I here? Lucien's hand slid down, his knuckles grazing her jaw in the lightest touch, so gentle it felt like a test. Electricity shot through her, sharp and immediate, and she sucked in a breath that sounded embarrassingly desperate. Lucien's eyes locked onto hers, darker now, filled with something that made her feel like prey and chosen all at once. Because you've been living like you don't matter, he said. And I'm going to change that. Elara's lips parted, but no words came. Her body betrayed her again, leaning a fraction closer, drawn to the warmth and the threat. Lucien's gaze dropped to her mouth. His voice lowered. Tell me to stop. Elara should have. She should have stepped back, should have laughed and walked out and never looked back. But the truth was, she hadn't been touched with tenderness in so long that even the possibility of it felt like salvation. And the way Lucien looked at her wasn't polite. It wasn't safe. It was consuming. Elara's voice shook. I don't know what this is. Lucien's thumb brushed the corner of her mouth, and Elara felt it like a brand. Neither do I, he admitted, and the vulnerability in the confession startled her. Not with you. For a moment, the mask slipped. Elara saw something behind his eyes, something old and lonely and hungry. She saw a man who wore power like armor, and under it something wounded. What do you want from me? She whispered. Lucien's breath warmed her face. The truth, he said. Your truth, the one you've been hiding. Elara's chest tightened. I'm not hiding anything. Lucien's eyes narrowed slightly, and the air around them felt suddenly charged. You are, he said. There's a secret inside you, Elara Vale. One that's been shaping your life without your permission. Elara's blood ran cold. How do you know my full name? Lucien's mouth curved faintly, but there was no humor in it. Because I've been watching you. The words should have terrified her, and they did, but beneath the fear was something darker. A thrill. A strange sense of inevitability, like her loneliness had been calling into the night, and something had finally answered. You what? Elara whispered. Lucien's hand moved to her waist, fingers firm, claiming the curve through her coat. He didn't pull her closer yet. He just held her there, anchoring her, as if he wanted her to feel that she was not floating anymore. I saw you in the hospital 6 months ago, he said quietly. The day you left with your diagnosis. Elara froze. The memory slammed into her, the sterile smell, the buzzing lights, the way she'd walked out holding herself together with sheer will. She hadn't noticed anyone, she hadn't wanted to be seen. I was there, Lucien continued, his voice rougher now, like the memory scraped him too. And when you cried in your car, trying to make no sound, something in me broke. Elara's eyes widened. That was you. Her mind scrambled, trying to recall faces, shadows. She remembered a feeling, a strange sensation of being watched, a pressure in the air. She thought it was paranoia. Lucien's grip tightened slightly, not painful but possessive. You looked like a woman who'd been told she was defective, he said, and the words sounded like poison in his mouth. And I wanted to burn the world that made you believe it. Elara's throat bobbed. This is insane. Lucien leaned closer, his lips near her ear, his voice dropping into something that vibrated through her bones. Tell me it doesn't feel like fate. Elara's eyes fluttered closed for a second, because it did, in the most terrifying way. She felt like the air had changed since she walked into this room, like her life had been pointing here all along. She pulled back just enough to look at him. Why do they call you the king? Lucien's gaze held hers, unblinking. Because everything in this city has a price, he murmured. And I'm the one who collects. Elara's stomach twisted. You're a criminal. Lucien's smile was slow, dangerous. Something like that. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. The sound made Elara flinch, and Lucien's expression softened for a fraction of a second. His hand slid up her back, steadying her. You're trembling, he observed. I'm not, Elara lied, and hated that her voice betrayed her. Lucien's eyes warmed with something like satisfaction, as if he liked that she was affected by him. Good, he murmured. It means you're alive. Elara swallowed hard. I should go. Lucien's hand tightened at her waist, and suddenly she was pressed back against the edge of a bookshelf, the wood cool against her spine. He didn't slam her. He didn't hurt her. He simply moved her like he knew exactly how much force would make her gasp, and how little would still let her choose. Her breath caught anyway. Lucien braced one arm beside her head, caging her in without touching her face. The other hand stayed at her waist, fingers spread, steady and hot. His eyes searched hers, intense, as if he was reading the smallest flickers of emotion. "Say it again," he whispered. "Tell me you're leaving." Elara's mouth went dry. Her heart hammered so hard she felt dizzy. Her gaze dropped to his lips. They looked soft in the firelight, a cruel contrast to the danger in his eyes. "I can't think." Lucien's breath hitched, the smallest crack in his control. His forehead lowered until it almost touched hers. "Neither can I," he admitted, and the honesty in his voice made her chest ache. Elara's hands lifted without permission, resting against his chest through his shirt. She felt the solid warmth of him, the steady strength beneath. It didn't feel like a stranger. It felt like something her body recognized, even if her mind refused to. Lucien looked down at her hands, then back up. "If I kiss you," he said softly, "it won't be polite." Elara's pulse jumped. "What does that mean?" "It means I won't be able to pretend I don't want more." His voice dropped lower, rougher. "And it means you might not be able to pretend either." Elara's eyes stung with tears she refused to let fall. "I don't belong here," she whispered, and it came out sounding like a confession. "I'm not whatever you think I am." Lucien's gaze sharpened, then softened, like he was fighting with himself. "You belong wherever you decide you belong," he said. "But you should know something, Elara." "What?" Her voice was barely audible. Lucien's thumb traced the side of her waist, slow enough to make her inhale sharply. "I don't let go of what I choose," he murmured, "and I've already chosen you." A chill raced through her, followed by heat. The words were a promise, and a threat wrapped together so tightly she couldn't separate them. Her mind screamed that this was dangerous, that obsession wasn't love, that powerful men didn't save women like her without wanting something in return. But her heart had been starving. Lucien's eyes flicked again to her throat, and his nostrils flared slightly, as if he was scenting something. His expression changed so subtly she almost missed it. A shadow passed over his face and something like hunger sharpened. Elara noticed and stiffened. "What?" Lucien didn't answer right away. He leaned in, his nose near her neck, not touching, just close enough that Elara felt his breath brush her skin. Her entire body went taut, and then her skin erupted in goosebumps as if her nerves were singing. Lucien's voice turned even quieter. "Your scent," he murmured, almost to himself. "It's different," Elara's fear spiked. "My scent," Lucien pulled back slightly, his eyes now glowing in the firelight in a way that made her stomach drop. Not literally glowing, she told herself. Just the reflection, just the light, but his gaze looked almost luminous. He stared at her like he was seeing past her skin. "Elara," he said, and the way he said her name sounded like a vow. "What are you?" she asked, and her voice shook despite her effort. Lucien's jaw tightened. For a moment, he looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, deciding whether to jump. "You came here for answers," he said. "But if I give them to you, you won't be able to go back." "I don't have anything to go back to," Elara whispered, and the truth of it tasted like grief. Lucien's expression flickered with something like pain. His hand slid up from her waist to her shoulder, fingers curling into her coat gently, as if he didn't trust himself with bare skin yet. "Don't say that," he murmured. "Not when you're standing in front of me." Elara's eyes burned. "Why do you care?" she demanded, and the question came out sharper than she intended. "You don't even know me." Lucien's gaze held hers. "I know what it's like to be abandoned," he said quietly, and for the first time his voice sounded old, weighted with centuries of something unspeakable. "I know what it's like to be wanted only for what you can provide." Elara's breath caught. "Like children." Lucien's eyes darkened, and he nodded once, slow. "Yes," he said, and the word carried a bitterness that didn't belong to a man who lived in a mansion and called himself king. "And I know what it's like to be feared for what you are." Elara stared at him, the pieces clicking together in her mind with sickening inevitability. The estate, the portraits, the secrecy. The old key, the way the cab driver refused to come closer, the way Lucian's eyes caught firelight like a predator's, her voice dropped to a whisper. What are you? Lucian's lips parted, and for a moment, Elara thought he might actually tell her. Then his gaze snapped past her shoulder toward the door, and his entire body went still. The shift was instant and terrifying. The warmth in the room seemed to drop. The fire crackled, but the sound felt far away, muffled by the sudden tension. Elara turned her head, confused, and then she heard it too, a faint thud from somewhere in the hallway, then another. Slow, deliberate footsteps approaching. Lucian's grip on her shoulder tightened. His face hardened into something ruthless, and when he looked back at her, his eyes held a command that made her blood run cold. Don't move, he murmured. Elara's heart slammed against her ribs. Who is that? Lucian didn't answer. His gaze fixed on the doors as they began to open, inch by inch, as if pushed by an unseen hand. The servant from earlier appeared in the doorway, but he looked different now. Pale, strained, his eyes darted to Lucian with fear. My king, he said, voice shaking. They found her. Elara's stomach dropped. Found who? She whispered, but no one looked at her. Lucian's jaw clenched so hard a muscle jumped. I told you to cover her tracks, he said quietly, and the calm in his voice was more frightening than shouting. I told you no one was to know she was here. The servant swallowed. It wasn't us. It's the council. Elara's breath caught. Council. The word didn't belong in her world, it belonged in stories, in shadows, in nightmares. Lucian's hand slid behind Elara's back, pulling her tighter against the bookshelf as if to shield her with his body. How long? He asked. Minutes, the servant whispered. They're at the gate. They have hunters. Hunters. Elara's blood turned to ice. Lucian, she started, but her voice cracked. Lucian looked down at her, and something fierce and protective flared in his eyes. Whatever happens, he murmured, you stay behind me. Elara's chest tightened. What is happening? Lucian's gaze locked onto hers, intense enough to steal her breath. You asked what I am, he said. You're about to find out. Before she could speak, the air shattered with the sound of glass breaking somewhere downstairs, followed by a low, unnatural hiss that raised every hair on Elara's body. The lights in the library flickered, and the fire suddenly flared high, as if reacting to something entering the house. A deep voice echoed up the staircase, carrying power like thunder wrapped in velvet. Lucien Blackthorn, it called, and the way it said his name sounded like a sentence being passed. Hand over the woman, she doesn't belong to you. Elara's knees nearly gave out. Lucian's arm tightened around her waist, holding her upright without even looking, like he could feel her fear through his skin. He leaned down, his mouth near her ear, his breath hot and steady despite the chaos. Listen to me, he whispered. If they take you, you will never be free again. Elara's eyes filled with tears. Why would they want me? She whispered back. I'm nobody. Lucian's voice turned raw. You are not nobody, he said, and his hand slid up to cup her jaw, forcing her to meet his gaze. You are the one thing they've been hunting for decades. Elara's breath stopped. What? Lucian's eyes burned into hers, dark and luminous. And for the first time she saw it clearly, the inhuman depth behind them, the predator, the king, the monster, and the man fused into one. You're not barren, he whispered, and the words hit her like a gunshot. You're something else, something rare, something they will kill for. Elara's world tilted. That's impossible, she choked. Lucian's thumb brushed her cheek, catching a tear she didn't realize had fallen. I can smell it in your blood, he murmured, and his voice shook with something like reverence and hunger. And now they can too. Downstairs, the front doors boomed as if struck by something heavy. Another hiss, closer now, and then the unmistakable sound of metal scraping stone. Lucian's gaze snapped to the doorway. His body shifted, and Elara felt it, the coiled violence under his skin, the way the room seemed to bow to him. The servant stumbled back, whispering frantic apologies. Elara grabbed Lucian's sleeve, panic making her fingers numb. Lucian, I don't understand, she pleaded. Tell me what I am. Lucian looked down at her one last time, and in his expression she saw a conflict that broke her heart. Desire and fear, possession and protection. A man who wanted to kiss her until she forgot her own name, and a king who would slaughter anyone who tried to take her. "You're mine," he said softly, and it sounded like a vow carved into stone. "And that's why you're in danger." The library doors behind them suddenly exploded inward with a crack like thunder, wood splintering across the floor. A rush of cold air slammed into the room, extinguishing half the candles in an instant. Figures filled the doorway, silhouettes in dark coats, their eyes glinting unnaturally in the firelight. One of them stepped forward, raising something that gleamed silver. Elara's scream caught in her throat. Lucien turned, placing himself fully in front of her, his shoulders broad as a wall. And then, as the silver weapon lifted higher, and the figure's lips curled in a cruel smile, Lucien's head tilted slightly, and his voice dropped into something that didn't sound human at all. "No," he said, and the single word vibrated through the room like a command. The figure with the silver weapon laughed. "The vampire king protects a human bride," it sneered. How poetic! Elara's blood turned to ice as the words sank in. Vampire, king, bride. Lucien glanced back at her over his shoulder, his eyes blazing with a terrible, intimate promise. "Run," he whispered. Before Elara could move, the silver weapon flashed through the air toward Lucien's heart, and the entire world seemed to slow as Lucien stepped into its path. The scream finally tore out of Elara's throat as the blade struck, and the chapter ended there, with the sound of steel meeting flesh and the fire roaring like a living thing.